All right, 1 second here. All right, so we're going holding by Pirkei Avos. Back to Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, as is known again, want to work on. Holding by Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers. We are in chapter 2, Mishna, Mishna 16. And this is part 48. There'll be a part 49, part 50, part 50. So we're going part 51 as well. Again, we're going holding by Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers. Chapter 2, Mishnah 16. We've been speaking about the evil inclination. The Mishnah tells us in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, an evil eye. Spoke quite a bit about that. The evil eye, the evil inclination, hatred of other people, remove a person from this world. Comes along the Tosis Yontif we mentioned before, one of the great commentaries on the Mishnah itself, and he explains what are we talking about over here? Talking about the majority of desire. Again, what does evil inclination want? Evil inclination wants a person to do the wrong thing, obviously, right? In other words, going to try and convince us to do the wrong thing, and get us to try and sin, etc. We spoke a few weeks back about this idea that the evil inclination is not going to come and say, I want you to desecrate Shabbos. The evil inclination is not going to come and say, I want you to do idolatry. I want you to do, whatever, you fill in the blank, whatever strong sin it is. What the evil inclination, even if it doesn't convince you to do that, what's the evil inclination going to do? The evil inclination will come and work on getting you to sin on other things, right? Smaller things, right? Let's say, much, much smaller things. And eventually, since the evil inclination never rests and never sleeps, so once it gets you to do small, quote unquote, smaller things, opens up a person to sin. And the fact that it opens up a person to sin, eventually they're going to do something very egregious. Again, whether it takes a lot of time, whether it takes less time, really not going to matter. The point is, the evil inclination has tremendous amount of patience. As we said, the evil inclination never sleeps. So therefore, day in and day out, the evil inclination is coming back stronger, faster, in different ways. Even if a person defeats the evil inclination today, again, the evil inclination comes back tomorrow. And even if the evil inclination comes back tomorrow and a person succeeds, the evil inclination comes back a third time, fourth time, fifth time, right? Until all the evil inclination needs, and we spoke quite a bit about this, so I don't want to really harp on it, but all the evil inclination work needs in general, the evil inclination, all it needs in general is an opening. That's all it needs, right? Once it has an opening, then the evil inclination will say goes for the jugular. Will do whatever it can to get a person to sin more, right? And then sin even more, and then eventually do something really horrific, and then the person's gonna say, I can never do this, and it's too hard, and I failed too many times, and right, exactly what the evil inclination wants. So I want to a little bit from I don't know, maybe a little bit of a different angle. I mean, it's really not so different, but I think it's just a little bit different way of looking at it. And the evil inclination itself Now, what does the evil inclination do? The evil inclination wants to convince us to do things that we shouldn't do. Now, the evil inclination is going to come, you know, in many different forms, in many different ways, meaning the evil inclination can come and say, well, if you do this, and you're holding better, let's say, than the majority of world Jewry, which I had an 18, 19-year-old kid tell me many years ago, you don't have to give me Musar, you don't have to give me ethics, holding better than, 95% of world Jewry. 18-year-old kid. Yeah, so I said, okay, let's say it's true. Right? Let's say I would agree with you. Yeah, but what if God doesn't agree? What if God thinks, even if it's true, that you have greater potential? So the fact that you're holding better than this generation, which is a cesspool, right? That's what this generation is. Total cesspool for what people do and how they act in, absolute craziness that goes on in the world, right? So you're holding better than Sodom, better than the worst of the worst. Well, that's beautiful. So who are you comparing to, right? So we mentioned that before. We mentioned that before as well. But what does the evil inclination want here? The evil inclination is going to convince us of things that, we're going to say it's not so bad. Why are we going to look at it in a negative way? Look at what the rest of the world does. Look how most people act in general, right? For example, most people curse some level, some more, some less, doesn't really matter, right? A lot of people, most people curse. Yeah, that's the norm. Some people more, some people less. Okay. The fact that a person wants to work on themselves and not curse, that's huge. But again, compared to this generation, we're not comparing the previous generation, right? And when a person dies and God's going to judge you for whatever we've done, God's not going to say, why why weren't you at the Vilna go if you didn't have that potential? Why weren't you like, from Elijah Vilna 500 years ago, right? Or 350 years ago, whatever it is, right? Why would you work, like this person or like that person? God's not going to judge that. He's not going to ask you that question. He's going to ask you, get your own potential, right? Nobody knows what their real potential is, right? So nobody can rest on their laurels. But I heard someone say, whatever, a number of years ago, and again, fact is always greater than fiction. Can't make this stuff up. Somebody says, an Orthodox Jew got caught, let's say embezzlement, right? Committing fraud, which obviously is bad. And certainly an Orthodox Jew does it, makes it look worse, right? Makes it more of a desecration of God's name, not in the literal sense, right? But look, it looks really bad. So the person makes a calculation, bad calculation, but they make a calculation. What's the calculation? Calculation is, wow, they're supposed to be holding by Torah mitzvahs. True? They come and make an egregious mistake. Okay. Now they say, I don't know by Torah mitzvahs. I don't keep kosher. I don't do these things. So, I didn't do that. I didn't cause fraud or embezzlement or whatever. So therefore, and this is their conclusion, therefore, since what this person was supposed to keep Torah mitzvahs and didn't, the fact that I don't keep Torah mitzvahs, but I didn't do this, so I don't have to keep anything. Where's the logic? There's no logic in that. There's absolutely no, you can pick this apart very easily, right? You don't need to be, an erudite rabbinic scholar to pick this apart. Very easy to pick it apart, right? What's the simple answer? What's the simple answer you're going to say to this person? Simple answer is God doesn't give a rat's tail what this other person did. God will deal with them. Yeah. God 100% will deal with them. Yeah. He's not going to ask you, okay, you didn't embezzle. I'm going to put you on a higher pedestal. You're not going to do that. God's going to judge you where you're holding and what you've done. So because someone else did something else, that gives you the right to say, well, I didn't do that, so I'm good. That means I don't have to keep anything. Doesn't make any sense. Right? Doesn't make any sense. My Rebbe brought down this week's Parsha, right? It says, Moiv Rebbe, Rav Agon, Moshe Mashlita should be well. And he's speaking in Parsha's Bracious, this week's Parsha, and he says, like this, right? Well, actually, we'll quote him here, almost verbatim. And then we'll get to the point here. It says, Bereshis bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Says the Torah, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So it brings down the Gemara Megillah. Gemara Megillah says on 9a, right, Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Now the Septuagint, what is the Septuagint? That was the translation of 70 sages who were forced. They didn't have a choice. They were forced to translate the Torah by the Greeks. Right? They're all put, each person put in a different house, right, in a different place. And the king commanded them, okay, I want you to rewrite the entire Torah. Right? Rewrite the entire Torah. So the words, Bereshis bara Elokim, that's the way we have it written. They translate it as Elokim bara Bereshis. What does that mean? Right? That God made the creation. Like, really created the beginning. Literally. Now, that's how they translate it in Greek. Everybody, again, one of the miracles here was everybody translated the same thing. Right? They came up with the exact translation. Each one the same. Now, why did they translate it that way? Right? So lest anyone think that the word Bereshis, which means in the beginning or in the beginning of God's creation, very hard to translate, but let's say in the beginning of God's creating, no one should think that Bereshis is a divine power. That it's in and of itself is a divine power. Yeah, who created another one, right? Created another divine power. What was that divine power? Elohim, right? The God of judgment. So in other words, what do I have? Potentially two divine powers. You can't have that, right? That's idolatry, right? Essentially, that's idolatry, right? So here, translate it in that way, so no one will think there's more than one divine creator. Yeah? Now, Rabbi asked the question, why the Torah from the very beginning? This is not the middle of the Torah, it's not the end of the Torah, to the beginning, first line of the Torah, right? It begins with an ambiguous phrase. Rashi goes to town trying to translate this, right? You know, and a lot of times he says, I can't understand this except through a medrash. Rashi normally goes according to simple explanation. Simple explanation won't work over here. Too many problems, right? You know, if someone would be, you know, a Hebrew grammarian, they would rip this thing to shreds, right? Because it's very ambiguous, extremely ambiguous. Now, question is, why? Some Rebbe asked the question, why is it so ambiguous? Why is it that from the very beginning of the Torah itself, why did it leave open the possibility of heretical interpretation? That someone can interpret it and be an abikoros, be a heretic. Now, he tells the following story. Someone used to be religious, once met Rav Chaim Brisker. He studied in Volozhin, famous yeshiva of Volozhin, the mother of all yeshivas, right? That yeshiva, through how they learned, is how we learn today, right? You know, Volozhin was yeshiva born 150 years ago. So this person went off. So Rav Chaim Brisker asked him, what happened to you? Right? He said, what happened to you? So the person said, well, I had a lot of questions. A lot of questions how God runs the world. Right? That was what this person answered. So Chaim replied, he said, if you had questions, right, he'd be willing to answer them. He could answer them. Definitely one of the Torah giants of the generation, no question. He could answer them. But these questions were not questions. They weren't so-called questions. They weren't genuine ones. Rather, excuses justifying his own conduct and lifestyle. And for such excuses, he had no answers. Meaning, he's given an answer. He's given an agenda. An agenda question, you know, we mentioned this many times before, we'll mention again. An agenda question, the answer is oh. Or, okay, why? Because they're not asking a question. They're stating, quote unquote, a fact. Yeah. I think, give an example. I think somebody says, I think, you know, Judaism discriminates against women. Now, what's the person going to go? No, you don't understand. Internal, external, this, that. They didn't ask a question. They never asked the question. They made a statement. I think Judaism discriminates against women. Is there a question there? There's no question, right? They're making a statement. Very good. So what's the answer? Okay. Yeah. So they say it, and Judaism is terrible in this way and that way. Okay. Yeah. After a bunch of times they keep saying this, and you keep answering the same thing, they're like, why do you keep saying that? Well, you didn't say anything. All you did was make a statement. I don't have an answer. You didn't ask a question. So then the person will say, okay, if I were to ask you that I think the Torah discriminates against women, what would you say? Okay, very good. That's a question, right? This is why in the Haggadah by the evil son, right? Passover, you don't answer. You blunt his teeth. Why not? Why don't you answer? Draw him closer. Yeah? Yeah, it's a similar question the wise son asked. So why do you give an answer to the wise son? Because he wants to hear an answer. The wicked son has an agenda. When someone has an agenda, you don't answer them. There's no point to answer them. Why not? They're not asking a question. Now, if they're asking this, obviously you have to see how they're asking the question. If they ask the question, yeah. So in general, a statement, I don't have to answer. We get all carried away. We get all caught up in this and that. Yeah. Something over Shabbos, whatever. We'll go into all the details. Someone, they didn't make a statement. They didn't make a statement per se. They're like, I think this should be this, and if this happens, do this, do that. Well, that wasn't a question. That was a statement. It was heretical. I answered it, right? I felt I had an obligation to answer. Can't let heresy just go, unbridled over here. So again, you're gonna pick your issues. But it's about life and death. I'm gonna speak about this in my Q&A. I don't want to speak about it now, but I'm gonna speak about it more in my Q&A on Tuesday. So you got what to look forward to. But again, end of life issues always hard, right? Always hard, very emotional, etc. But I'll give you a hint over here. It's like quality of life, right? Quality of life. What's considered quality of life, right? So the insinuation was if you don't, if you're sitting there like a vegetable, but you're not on a ventilator, yeah, okay, let's say you're paralyzed. I know an older person, much older person, basically paralyzed, fell, broke their neck, basically paralyzed. They say that's not quality of life. Now, I didn't have to answer that, but the insinuation was, it's not quality of life, kill him. Why do anything to extend the life? Yeah. Now, it's an interesting question. Again, I'll deal with this more. I don't want to get bogged down here, right? But what's the question over here? They put a trach in, right? They did a tracheotomy. And if they didn't do a tracheotomy, yeah, what would happen? You suffocate, right? We'll be able to breathe. Now, the question is, do they have an obligation to do it? That's okay. That's a different question. But the fact that he has a tracheotomy, he's got a trach in right now. What happens? So I asked the question, what happens to take the trach out? Again, okay, he's paralyzed, but he's not brain dead. 100% he's not brain dead. He's there. He just can't move. Okay. Yeah. So what happens if you take the trach out? Well, someone said he'll die. Very simple. You won't be able to breathe. And what happens when you can't breathe? Over, not a long period of time, you'll die. Right? No matter what age you are, you'll die. Right? The person much older will probably die quicker. So in that case, you take the trach out, this person suffocates, that's murder. That is murder, right? Now, there's the question, again, I'm going to speak about this more in depth on Tuesday, but there's one other point. There's the question, do you have to put the trach in or not? That's the question. Yeah? In other words, if I'm passive, I don't do the action directly. Am I allowed to, is the person allowed to say, no, I don't want it? Right? Does the person have an obligation to take medication if it's going to save their life or not? Gemara already asked this question. Yeah, it's passive, not active. Something passive is not considered murder. They don't want to extend their life. Okay. Their choice. Yeah, but you can't do something active. So doing something active, if you pull that trach out, this person will die. Well, guess what? That you can't do. That 100% you're not allowed to do. Why not? It's murder. Doesn't matter. You shoot him in the head. It's murder. The same thing. No different. Yeah. But anyway, what got me onto this, right? Because the person is making a statement or giving over an agenda, whatever you want to call it, which I didn't really have to answer, but is heretical, right? And that's not called quality of life, right? That's what they're saying. It's not quality of life. Okay, so what's quality of life? What's the definition? The person's not dead. He's not in a coma. He's not on a respirator. Yeah. Again, these are tricky end of life questions, but they're claiming that's not quality of life, right? So I think great. So you get to that point, your cognitive senses go, well, just throw you over a cliff. Don't call, not cognizant. Your brain's going down. You're not going to function as much. Probably can't play Sudoku or do word games, or someone once told me that also. Person had a stroke, can't play Sudoku. Well, life's over. Life's over. You can't play Sudoku. Can't do crossword puzzle. What if you're blind to deaf? Can't watch football games. Oh, game over. Throw them over a cliff. What's the definition of quality of life? According to that definition of quality of life, you could kill the person. Well, all they can do is smile. Well, isn't that worth something? Isn't life worth something? You're not brain dead. Right? I mean, you might be brain dead in other ways, but you're not brain dead. Can't kill them. You can't get, but people can justify. That's the point. People can justify anything and make excuses. Right? My Rebbe here says, in other words, matter of character traits, right? That's what it's talking about. Because people want to live an unbridled lifestyle. They want to live a lifestyle without yoke of Torah, very good or not so good. And they come up with all kinds of supposed problems, questions. Got all these questions, age of the universe, right? Someone will ask the question, how can the world be 5,786 years old, years old or whatever, when really science says, it's billions of years old. Okay, interesting question. Different potential answers. My question would be, do you have sleep? This is what's been bothering you, like for the last 20 years? Like you can't sleep because you're worried about the age of the universe? Or you're going to throw the question, where's God during the Holocaust? Well, I got a great book, right? It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. You want to read it? It's like, no, it's just a question I ask rabbis, make them fidget. Okay. Yeah, you can ask the question, very good. What's behind the question? Yeah. So here, there's an agenda. People have an agenda. So in order to justify their life and their lifestyle without the yoke of Torah, they come up with questions with supposed problems to justify their neglect or abandonment of religion. So here my Rebbe says, God wanted to start the Torah with a base. Why does the Torah start with a base? Bereshis. Right? According to some of the commentaries, the base has nothing to do with the root of the word. Because the next word, bara, means to create. So if you're going to say Bereshis, the root of the word is Bet Resh Aleph, it's he created and created. God created and created. That wouldn't make sense grammatically. Yeah. So the base, not necessarily part of the root of the word. In either case, the Torah starts with a base. Yeah. There are a number of lessons here we learn out. Right. And the most important one was the danger of misleading potential abikors, potential heretics. Why? Because I got such verses. In any case, the person can learn them different ways. Yeah, but essentially, that's not why they're heretics. Right? Similarly, it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and Rashi comments, the Torah says, let us make man in our image. Who's we? Who's he talking to? Right? Let us make man. What is it? The British we. Who's us? Who's he talking to? Right? So Rashi says, even though the angels did not assist God in creation, and he's talking to the heavenly court, there's an opportunity for heretics to rebel, nonetheless. Because they could say, well, God, God's talking to other gods. Maybe other gods created man. Yeah, maybe the whole committee created man. I don't know. Whoever it is. So the Torah did not hesitate to teach proper conduct and the trait of humility that a great person should consult with someone less than him. Yeah, and receive permission from a smaller person. Did God need the angel to speak to the angels about creating man? No. They need to speak to the heavenly court about creating man? No. Does God need to ask anyone, right? Does he need to ask anyone why he's doing something or not? No. Right? But what do I learn over here? I learn over here very clear, right? That Torah says in such a way a person can make a mistake. Yeah. And then we learn out God's humility. And a great person should consult and receive permission from even someone smaller. Yeah. Now, it's not limited to just judicial things, as Mary Bear points out. It also teaches that we should not live in a self-centered existence. Everyone's created with talents and abilities and positive qualities in order to share them with our fellow human beings and assist them to the best of our abilities. So this is so important. God felt it should be said it even at the beginning, right? Even at the risk of misleading potential heretics, right? In other words, let's say after 120 years, the person gets upstairs, the person dies, God judges them, very good. They're gonna say, God's gonna say, well, why didn't you keep Torah and mitzvahs? Person said, well, I sort of looked into it, and I came to this conclusion, that conclusion, because, it was there. It was possible to come up with such a conclusion. But God said you made the wrong choice. I didn't, that's not what the truth is. You came up with your own ideas. Very good. They can say, but you put it in there for me to make a mistake. What's God going to answer? I didn't do that. Right? Yeah, it's ambiguous. You could go one way, you could go the other way. True. But there's plenty of what to learn from it. You chose the wrong way. Person's not going to have that excuse. Right? In other words, if a person's going to make a mistake, don't we have free choice? We absolutely have free choice. Oh, a person got caught up, in academia. And all of academia does not hold of creation, right? They're busy trying to still figure out evolution because that's the only other alternative, right? Is basically evolution. And even plenty of scientists don't believe in evolution. Problematic to believe in evolution for many reasons. Not the point here, right? But they won't entertain the possibility of the story of creation being true. Well, what else do you have? What's your other alternative? The other alternative is evolution. Very good. Have they found the missing link according to science? No, but they'll find it. Okay. Can they explain, how the universe is expanding? No. Have they proved it through science? Yeah, but we'll find out how. Well, doesn't that show maybe there's a supernatural being that's right? No. Right? Einstein said that, and Stephen Hawking, one of the greatest physicists of our generation, right? Also tremendous heretic as well. But they didn't find any information to prove their point, right? Meaning they proved there's a expanding universe, but they don't know how it's expanding. Not through science, not through math, but through science and math, they understand it's expanding. Very good. So I would say, Steve, Al, right? So give me scientific proof. Give me mathematical proof. We don't have any. Okay, now if you don't have mathematical proof, then you have to entertain the possibility the story of creation according to the Bible is right. No! We'll never entertain that possibility. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. You've proven through math and science, right, and through physics, that the world's an expanding universe. Agreed? Agreed. Yeah. Everyone in science and math will prove that. True. Okay, so what's making it expand? Well, we're not sure. We don't have any proof. Say that again? No, I'm not sure. I'm kind of thick in the head. Yeah. We don't have any proof from science. Very good. But we'll find it. But you don't have proof right now. So caught me being obnoxious as I could be. I would say either find me proof right now or at least be intellectually honest and say there's one other possibility. We're not going to entertain evolution. There's one other possibility. The other possibility has to be the story of creation. But they won't do that. There's no greater, cognitive dissonance than that. Because they have an agenda. The agenda is science is right. The agenda is mathematics is right. Yeah, but he can't prove this. Yeah, so in other words, they can make their own mistake. They can see it right in front of their face and make a huge mistake. Right? So, my Rebbe continues, the very existence of the sun and the stars in all of science of astronomy, what does it point towards? Creator. Pretty clear. Yeah? But heretics will still clothe their views with an intellectual veneer, meaning that the source of their outlook is what? Where does it come from? In other words, they, sun, the moon, the stars, all these different things obviously has a purpose, but doesn't it show like how could that be created by accident? In millions of stars. Yeah, how in the world could they be created by accident? So he says, very interesting. Very interesting. How could they look the other way? How could they not see this? Because the source of their outlook is bad character trait. That's what it is. That's where it stems from. Really, they feel the emptiness of their lives. They want to justify their immoral behavior. And they're going to say, I got intellectual problems. Age of the universe. Right? That bothers me. How women are treated. That bothers me. Some things bother me. Quote unquote intellectual problems. Right? And those things, those issues are going to stop them from leading a religious lifestyle. So he brings down the Rav of Yerushalayim many years ago, Rav Shulei Brisket, known as the Rav of Brisk as well. Right? Came to live his last years in Jerusalem, the holy city. Right? And he was a rabbi of Jerusalem. And he noted heresy what? Denies the existence of God. That's what it does. Takes God right out of the picture. Try and figure out this way, that way, the other way, right? But takes God out of the picture, right? And what are they going to claim? They're going to claim the only reality is nature. Where does nature come from? How does nature work? Why is the sun, not so much closer to us? Otherwise, we'd be incinerated. Or if we're too far away, we'd be like Pluto. Yeah, that frozen tundra. Even though Pluto got demoted as a planet. Yeah, nonetheless, their only realm of reality is nature. Now, does that make sense? He says it's so irrational, says Rishulei Diskin, can only be explained as a supernatural phenomenon created by Hashem. Right? Meaning, then how could anyone deny this? How could anyone deny you see the stars, the moon? All these different things in the world obviously go towards showing that there's a divine creator. There's something supernatural. No, we don't want to believe it. We go at it different ways. We don't have to look at, what the creationists say and this and that. Okay. But says Rav Shulei Diskin, an amazing thing over here. He said, this is unbelievably so irrational. In other words, you're looking at something, you're looking at the truth right in front of your face. You refuse to even acknowledge there might be a God, right? And he created the world. You refuse to acknowledge anything supernatural. He says it's so irrational, so absolutely irrational, can only be explained as a supernatural phenomenon created by God. God allowed this to happen. He didn't want it to happen, but he allowed people to, and he knew this would happen. But he allowed it to happen because he gave people free choice. But it says Rav Shulei Diskin, it's so irrational. You have to say God put it there for them to make their own mistake. He said, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. How could a person see the stars, the moon, and still say, no, it could happen? All these things are random. It's a random thing, the way the stars, the million of stars, and the moon, and whatever. And they all exist and how they exist and whatever. So says Rav Shulei Diskin further. He says that a person needs tremendously heavenly help, tremendous yata d'shmaya, as we would call it, to keep our distance from heresy. Especially in the final period, prior to the coming of Mashiach, right? Prior to the coming of the Messiah, when the powers of impurity increase, knowing that the power of the evil inclination is going to end, right? What does the Gemara in Sukkah say? When Messiah comes, the evil inclination, the angel of death, whatever you want to call him, right, gets destroyed. Meaning whoever survives that final war of Gog and Magog will not have free will. right? They'll be all doing the will of God. Why are they going to be doing the will of God if they survive? Because there will be no evil inclination. But the amount of impurity in the world today, yeah, is, I just heard, a short lecture by Yitzhak Berkowitz, should be well. He's the head of the yeshiva of Aish Torah in Jerusalem. Massive, rabbinic scholar. And one of the things he was echoing, right? He said a very, very similar thing about current events, what's going on. And, he was saying that, even the leftists back in the day, right? 30, 40, 50 years ago, their agenda is not even close to what it is today. Not even close. They also had values. Without getting into politics, they also had values. You know, some better, some not. Okay, but they had values. So today, the value system gone out the window. Totally out the window, whatever you think. Now they get this whole agenda trying to convince people they're in the wrong body. Yeah. But that's not brainwashing. That's not trying to change the tide of society. That's education. Right? Trying to educate, a 7-8-year-old. Right? 7-8-year-old is going to make a decision, at that age. Maybe I'm in the right, maybe I am in the wrong body. They don't have any das. They don't have any knowledge. And even when they're 13, yeah, when they become bar mitzvah, they also don't have so much knowledge. Yeah, you want to try and tell me that's fair education? No, what you do is indoctrination. What we do is education. You're forcing people to whatever. We're giving them values. We're not leaving it up in the open and saying, well, depends what you feel. Torah's not about what I feel. Torah's about the truth. Torah's about what I have to do and what my obligations are. It's not like, well, I feel like it, I don't, this, it's like someone said, well, this other person's supposed to keep Torah. They don't, so why should I? What does that have to do with anything? There's no logic, right? And there's so many things. I mean, I could be here till tomorrow, going through different things that people are going to use, as excuses, and that's what they are, to say, oh, I don't have to keep this or I don't have to keep that. Yeah, I'll give another example. So once during the winter, I was in the States, someone came to visit, and gave a bunch of sweaters to my kids. Very good. And on the sweaters, it said 100% wool. Now, if something says 100% wool, for a Jew, you got to get it checked. You got to get checked for shotness. Why? It's still a prohibition. You can't mix wool and linen together. So if it says 100% wool, you got to make sure that there's no linen in it. Because, they cut corners, put wool, let's say, in a jacket or something like that. They could put, linen in buttons and other things, whatever it may be. So the person asked me why. Right? Why is that the case? Let's say you were Jew. Ask me this question. So that's a good question. We're not really sure. It's one of the laws. It's called the chok. It's a law that doesn't make rational sense. Right? It does not make any rational sense. Yeah. So they said, so if it doesn't make rational sense, why would I keep it? So I said, if I gave you 10 different explanations, possibly why this law was given, would you keep it? And I said, before you even answer the question, you'll see, well, it doesn't fit my world outlook. I don't like this answer. Answer doesn't speak to me. Oh, this answer I don't like either. This answer, you can say, well, I have a doubt. I'm not sure. Why should I do something if I don't know? Good. Then that person will do nothing. They will do nothing. Right? But my answer was, if I come up with an answer, let's say I find an answer, then you say, okay, I buy that. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's say. I said, if I find you an answer, are you going to keep it? Well, it depends. I'm not going to keep it. Right? I'm not going to keep it if you give it, even if you give the best explanation in the world. I said, wow, that's really beautiful, whatever. Next. I'm not going to keep it. Why? They don't want to look like me. They don't want to be religious. They don't want to, they'll say, well, no one's expected. I've heard this argument also. I did a Q&A on it. No one's expected to keep the whole Torah. Well, we can only keep about half the mitzvahs. Person doesn't live in Israel. If they're not a Kohen, they're not a Levite. You can only keep about half the mitzvahs today, right? In general. They know we can keep all the mitzvahs. Okay. We don't have an obligation to keep all the mitzvahs. Whatever applies, we have to keep. Yeah, very good. But when God gave the Torah, did he say keep whatever you want? Did he say keep what makes sense to you? Did he say there's a mitzvah, there's a positive command in the Torah to pick and choose? He didn't say that. He says by the Bereshit Moshe Lemor. God spoke to Moshe saying, Daber b'nei Israel, speak to the Jewish people, or speak to Aaron and speak to Moses, speak to the Jewish people, whatever. Tell them to do this, that, and the other thing. Does that look like it's an option? Doesn't seem like it's an option. Yeah. You say, oh, certain things we can't do today. Good. Why not? Because of our sins. A lot of things we can't do. We can't bring sacrifice. That's one of them. Temple's not rebuilt in Jerusalem. Can't do it. Oh, let's try and rebuild it. Good luck. You know, you're gonna have a lot of political problems. Forget halachic problems. You're gonna have a lot of political problems. Yeah, you try. And some people every year try to bring a sheep, up on the Temple Mount, so they can kill it for what do you call it, a Paschal offering. Right? It's never gonna happen. Right? If the police don't stop you, the Arabs will. Right? There's no problem going up on the Temple Mount. Anyway, we've spoken about that a number of times as well. Right? So politically and halachically, it's not gonna happen. Right? It's a moot point. But why can't we bring sacrifice? We said this in Musaf. In the additional service, we say on every festival, because of our sins, we can't bring sacrifices. But it says sacrifices in the Torah. Very good. But you can't bring them. We don't have a temple yet. It hasn't been rebuilt. So let's rebuild it. Go try. The Messiah hasn't come. That's one of his jobs. Right? It's part of his job. He's got to rebuild the temple. He's got to bring in all the exiles. And one of the most important things, he cannot die at this point. There's a Messiah of Yosef, he could die. Right? Difference of opinion, but he could die. The Messiah of David's not going to die at this point. Right? He's got too many things he needs to do. Once he finishes what he does, that's a different issue. But he can't die in the process. Where do we learn it out from? So we learn it out from the story of Bar Kokhba, or Bar Koziva, as he was known, that Rabbi Kiva thought he was the Messiah. And what happened? He got killed. Right? Rabbi Kiva learned from that the Messiah cannot die. Messiah cannot die. Yeah, comes on the Rambam. And the Rambam over there says very good. The Rambam says, according to Jewish law, the Messiah's got certain things he's got to do. And one of the things he cannot do while being the Messiah and finishing the job that God wants him to do is die. He's not going to die at that point. He may die later, but he's not going to die at that point. The fact that Bar Kokhba died, and Rabbi Akiva thought that this was the Messiah, comes on the Rambam and says, you can't die. The Messiah of David can't die at that point. Yeah. So bottom line over here, that, before the Messiah comes, what do I have? You have unbelievable power of impurity. Unbelievable power of impurity. And you see what goes on. Yeah, where you have the greatest amounts of Torah, i.e. in the land of Israel, you have tremendous forces against it. From the mixed multitude, ones of the government, secular Jews. Their goal 100% is to uproot Torah mitzvahs. That's their goal. They want to be cultural Jews. They want to, be Israeli. They want to be, able to eat falafel and do whatever. They want to be like everybody else. But that's not why God gave the land of Israel. Right? First Rashi explains the name of Rav Yitzchak. Then Rav Yitzchak said, why does the Torah start with Bereshit bara Elokim Beis Hashemayim Beis Haaretz? God created the heaven and the earth. Why does it start with Exodus chapter 12? What's Exodus chapter 12? First mitzvah. What's the first mitzvah? Chodesh Chazon Lahem. Right? New moon. Right? The calendar. That's first mitzvah in the Torah. Why did you start with the first mitzvah? Why you tell me about creation? And the answer is, you tell me about creation because, as Rav Yitzchak says, the nation's going to have a claim. The nation's going to have a claim and say, you stole the land, it belongs to us, i.e. the Jewish people, right? You stole the land. You stole the land, it belongs to us. Well, why don't we say finders keepers? Why don't we say might makes right? Right? One of the things I remember, my ninth grade social studies class, was power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah? One of the things I remember. So, anytime someone conquers another country, they never give it back. You have one time in history where you had a population exchange in the 70s between Pakistan and India. But who's ever, in Israel has gotten a lot of flack for this. Not for that, but, for the land they quote unquote, took. they got a lot of flack for it, and they're going to say, "You got to give it back." It's one of the Arabs' claims. You got to give it back. Go back to the 6 Day War boundaries, which would be impossible to to enforce today. To be in peace with them. If you gave all that land back, it's like the heart of the country. It'd be very hard to live here that way. Nonetheless, the claim is they have to give land back and bring all the refugees back. That'd be suicide, absolute suicide. But no one else in the history of mankind, they overcame another country and took land, never had to give it back. Never happened in history. It's only by Israel. It's only by the Jewish people, which makes no sense. Not only that, it was a defensive war. It wasn't an aggressive war. It was a defensive war. Yeah, they got into war because they had to, because they got attacked. Whoever gives land back in a defensive war? It's never happened. In history, go check it out. Ask ChatGPT. Never happened. In a defensive war. Right? So now the claim is, so Rav Yitzchak says, why does Torah start with creation? So nations won't have a claim. Because God created the heaven and the earth. So if God wants Jewish nation to have the land of Israel, it'll be theirs. They want someone else to, take over the land, it'll be theirs. But God giveth, and God taketh away. They say it's not fair. The land should belong to us. They have no right to take it. Right? A lot of problems with this. A lot of problems with this Rashi. Right? What's the main problem here? The main problem is if you tell the non-Jews, you tell the non-Jewish nations, wow, you know why we have a right to the land? Because Bereshit bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Because God created the heaven and the earth. You're going to say, so what? What if he created the heaven and the earth? Yeah, we don't believe in that God anyway. Yeah, we believe in, I don't know, in idols and other things or whatever. But your God didn't create the heaven and the earth. You stole our land. That argument's not going to wash with them. Totally not going to wash with them. Because they're going to claim, what does that have to do with anything? Yeah, what in the world does that have to do with anything? That had nothing to do with nothing. You stole the land. It belongs to us. Right? Whatever. There are many different answers. Right? One answer is to strengthen us. I just saw the Maral today. Maral of Prague brings down in Gur Aryeh. Right? One of the answers is that you're right. The nation's never going to listen. 100%. They're never going to listen. Yeah. So what's the point? The point is God is telling the Jewish people, right? He's telling the Jewish people the land belongs to you and it's holy because I gave it to you. Right? So Rabbi Chanan answers that, or even before we get to Rabbi Chanan, from Rabbi says that the answer cannot be for the sake of the non-Jews. Right? It's got to be for the sake of the Jews. Right? Because the nations are going to come and say, it really belongs to us, and you're committing genocide, you're doing this, doing that, doing the other thing. We got to strengthen our own faith in God and realize that what? The land of Israel belongs to us. Yeah? It really belongs to God. Let's say better. Who gave it to us? Why did he give it to us? Not so we can eat falafel. Right? He gave it to us to keep his mitzvahs. Yeah? That's our faith. So the argument of the nations will automatically fall away because it's not about them. It's not about whether we stole the land or not. It belongs to God. Yeah? And he gave it to us. And what's the purpose he gave it to us? So we can keep mitzvahs. Not to be like any other nation. Yeah? Because their power to oppose us, what does it depend on? On the degree of our faith. And if we remain strong and cleave to God, as Rabbi says, there's no power. There's zero power. Comes on Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Hashem Yikam Damoy, famous head of the Shiva in Baranovich, that was killed during the Holocaust, famous student of the Chofetz Chaim, and he says, based on nature, based on natural premises, it's very, very dangerous to live in the land of Israel. Why? Because we're surrounded by our enemies. And what our enemies want to do, they want peace. Nobody wants peace, right? Just read what Hamas said recently. Yeah, they're not going to disarm. Well, it's going to be phase 2. Let's see. I mean, not to get into politics, they're committing suicide here, right? If they give over the rest of the dead bodies, yeah, which, they're still trying to quote unquote find them, right? They're going to give over some over, I don't know, next few days or whatever. Yeah, it's absolute suicide for them. It doesn't make any sense at all. Why, there's a lot of pressure put on them. I get it from Qatar and from other places. They got to be getting something somewhere. I don't know. Doesn't make any sense because these are their bargaining chips. If they give up all their bargaining chips without getting into politics, what's going to stop Israel from going in there and just flattening the entire place? Now you say they get a lot of flack, from the rest of the world, and maybe America will give them flack, and they okay, right? It's probably a good deterrent. But what's stopping them? What would stop them from going in and just killing everybody? Nothing should stop them because they have no bargaining chips anymore. What do they have to lose? If you want to get them out of power, you can kill all of them. There's no other way. There's no other way. You can just go and kill everybody. Right? Not so popular to say. Probably ban me from YouTube for it. Right? Doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it's suicide for them. I was just talking to someone right after Shabbos here. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Right? Does not make a whole lot of sense. In general, it doesn't make sense. Right? They are giving they are giving up their bargaining chips, right? They're giving up their bargaining chips over here. So if they're giving up their bargaining chips, what do they have left? What in the world do they have left? What technically is going to stop them? Stop the Israelis from going in, just massacre everybody. They say the nations, other things, okay. But in general, what should stop them? What in the world? It doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense for what they're doing. They're probably getting a lot of pressure and other things. But even if they are, the question is going to be, if they hand over, what are they going to have left? Because they want them disarmed. They want them disarmed. They give over the dead bodies. They have no bargain chip. They have nothing. We have absolutely nothing, right? So comes along Rebbe Chanan over here. Rebbe Chanan says, according to nature, according to natural premises, it's very dangerous to live in the land of Israel, surrounded by enemies who want to do what? Want to kill us, want to annihilate us, thirsting for blood. So how do you offset that? You offset it by life of Torah and Kedusha, Torah and holiness, and you live without fear, right? Because if we do what we're supposed to do, we keep Torah and mitzvahs the way we should, very good. What's that going to do? That'll protect us, right? Now, the other thing, trying to get, every Orthodox Jew to go in the army that's fitting to go in the army, it's also suicide. That's the divine protection, right? People sitting and learning. Say, okay, we're not going to take everybody, only take some of them, okay, without even getting into that whole question. But that's the protection. In other words, if you're living like a Jew should in the land, that's protection. That's divine protection. And if you're not, we're in serious trouble. There, my Rebbe says, only by leading a life of Torah and holiness. Can we live without fear? Yeah, if, however, we follow the advice of our erring brethren by living the lifestyle of the non-Jews and going in their ways, I'm going to speak more about that tomorrow in the book of Leviticus, then we have no right under the Torah to live here and will be exposed to great dangers from enemies. That is the biggest problem. Single biggest problem. My Rebbe said many times, many times, we don't have anything to fear from Iran, any of these places. The only thing we have to fear are people who live in the land and sin. Now, what about people who live outside the land and sin? That's also bad. But if you live in the land and you're going to live like everybody else, like the Gentiles of the world, and you're going to be like everybody else, that's much more dangerous. Much more dangerous, puts people in the land of Israel tremendous danger. Why? Because you have all these nations, all these Arabs surrounding us. Yeah, even if we have nuclear weapons, doesn't really matter. But what would stop these nations taking as many people as possible, surrounding it on all sides, and just going in and attacking as many people as possible? But I hope none of the other nations are listening here. Yeah, what would stop them? Logically, what would stop them? They take 10 million people, 10 million people, 5 million people, 5 million people. Yeah, let's say they attack from all sides with all kinds of armaments and who knows what. There's people sitting ducks. Yeah, okay. Then everyone has to go, then everyone has to go out and fight. Okay, but still, the odds are tremendously against you. Tremendously against you. And what's stopping them from doing it? God. That's it. Protection of Torah and mitzvahs. That's it. Nothing else. Right? there were, I'll just make this one point. There are a bunch of questions here to deal with. So, a number of years ago, you had the bus attack. You had Arabs going on buses and attacking people, killing people, or trying to kill people. Yeah, but these were people legal in the country. Legal in the country. Now, how do you stop that? Up north, down south, how do you stop that? They're legal. They're legal to come in the country. Is there any possible way, according to nature, to stop that? Okay, you're going to say, you have places set up where, the car's going to be checked and different things from different areas. Very good. Yeah, that may be true. But what if they're legal to come in the country? Yeah, they have the legal papers. You can't stop them. Unless they're suspicious or something, or they're about to attack you, or who knows what, right? But in general, if they have all their legal papers, there are tens of thousands of Arabs work in the country, legally. How do you stop that? It's impossible. According to law, you can't stop it. Yeah. So you had all these attacks. What was the, and then eventually it stopped. Right after like a few months, it stopped. So their claim, so the army's claim is, yeah, we infiltrated, we did this, we did that, power of our hands. But according to nature, that should not happen. As great as the army may be, and this and that, intelligence may be, there's no possible way, if they wanted to attack on all different fronts, coming into the country and doing this, they could do it. 100% they could do it. Nothing stopping them. Yeah, there's only one thing stopping them. God's stopping them. So why did it stop? Because God wanted it to stop. Yeah, why did he decide to stop it then and not later or before, whatever? I can't answer. But it stopped. Right? 100% it stopped. Okay? Why after, 2 years in horrific conditions, why all of a sudden now, the last 20 officers get out now? Say, oh, I put pressure into this, everything went up to this, that, and the other thing. 2 years. 2 years, people live like animals. Had them in chains and whatever. In cages, who knows what. Didn't have light, barely had food, starved them. Yeah, I don't have an answer why, we had to go through it and, and all that. But you have to ask the question, all of a sudden, why now? Why specifically now, right? Yeah, right before the end of Sukkot. Yeah, right before the beginning of Simchas Torah here. But, some of the people were stuck there for 2 years. 2 years now, living out. They were stuck there. So, it's all part of a divine plan. We don't understand the divine plan. Right? No one, we have no prophecy, only, fools and, and little children. But there's no prophecy today. Right? We have no prophecy, so nobody knows. People can guess and think and theorize and, whatever. But nobody knows the ultimate divine plan. Right? So to speak. Nobody knows. So, at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, that, as Rabbi Chanan said, that, where you have so much impurity, you got to realize that we have to stay strong in Torah. 100% we have to stay strong in Torah and realize that God's in charge. Yeah. And that is what's saving us in the land, right? What's saving us in the land is not the army. Now, you need a standing army. No one's going to disagree. Even the time of King David, you needed a standing army. Okay. But where is the protection? And we've seen many times the army screw up in other parts of, Air Force, other things. Have literally made serious mistakes. October 7th being one of them, but many other things as well without going into detail. Nonetheless, could be a lot worse. I'll give one example. That after the Gulf War, they issued all these gas masks before, so in case there was there's a gas attack, right? But it came out later that most of these masks, not almost all of them, they didn't work, right? They were totally flawed. 100% they were flawed. It came out after, right? So God forbid if there was an attack, which they never found, weapons of mass destruction, all that, but God forbid there was that type of attack. Those gas masks were useless. Essentially useless. That's how it came out. They were totally useless. Now, they admitted that. Now, what if there had been such a serious attack? Let's say you had a gas attack, God forbid, I don't know, hit in the middle of Tel Aviv. Tens of thousands of people would have died. Not from the impact, from the gas, because the gas mask didn't work. So the fact that the gas mask didn't work, there was no attack. Seemingly, God didn't allow it to happen, or He could have allowed it to happen, and maybe they would have worked. I don't know, or these missiles wouldn't have hit anything, but they didn't have anything to knock it down at that point, right? Talking 35 years ago. They didn't have the Patriot missiles back then. So they were sitting ducks, essentially sitting ducks. And what happened? Didn't happen, right? The attacks didn't happen. I mean, the Scud missiles came, but they didn't have, gas on, whatever. But even so, they weren't prepared. They certainly weren't prepared. But you're saying, listen, the best army in the Middle East, and it's this, and it's that. Okay. Doesn't mean it's totally not fallible, right? Or infallible, right? Let's say better. They can make mistakes. They can have screw ups. They can, other things can happen. Very good. But at the same time, what's protecting the Jewish people? And that's what Rebbe Chanan here said. What's protecting the Jewish people is Torah. Because logically, the Jewish people being in the land, certainly right now, should not happen. Shouldn't be here. The Arabs attacked so many different times. They lost every single time. They totally, got demolished. Miraculous. I don't think there's any question. Miraculous. But that's only because of the power of Torah and the power of keeping mitzvahs. That is what's keeping the Jewish people here, right? And what's the worst thing secular Jew can say, especially here? You know what's keeping the Jewish people safe? Torah says, the book of Deuteronomy, the power of my hands. The army is protecting us. You say the army is protecting us and not God, right? If you take God out of the picture, not 100% heresy, 100% heresy, and that's the worst thing a person can say. Worst thing a person can say, because the more they say it, the worse it is, right? Because it's taking God out of the picture. Now I'll tell you something. Could be somewhat even worse than that. What could be worse? Let's say a religious Jew says, all these things open miracles. They're open miracles. Yeah, what's so bad about saying it's a miracle? Because if a person says it's a miracle, what does the person have to do? A person has to admit, right? You've admitted it's a miracle, very good. But now, what did you do to change? What did you do to change anything? God did a miracle, right? God absolutely did a miracle here. So if God did miracles, let's say a couple of years ago in Passover, right? 300 missiles and drones come in. They knock out all of them. Odds of that are like zero. No one expected that. At best, they expected at least to knock out half. Certainly not all of them. You knock out every single one of them. You say, wow, what an unbelievable thing. Now, let's say a religious person says that. Now, why did God do it? So you say we have divine protection. Very good. So God does a miracle like that. I mentioned this last week as well. What did a person do to change? Did they do anything to change because God did that? And if God looks down and says, well, I didn't see really too many people change and I helped them out, and look what I did, that's really bad. Then God can say, what did I do the miracle for in the first place? Yeah, so in a certain way, that's worse. But in any case, let me stop here. Let me address some questions here. Somebody asks, how do you answer an evil question? Do you not answer or say, oh? So the question is it a question or not? Right? That is the question. No pun intended. Did the person ask a question? If they ask the question, right? If they ask the question, then you can answer it. And if you don't have an answer, you can say, well, it's a good question. I'll get back to you. I'll get someone who, can answer it, or I'll find an answer, whatever it is. But if they didn't ask a question, right? If they didn't ask a question, there's no mitzvah to answer. The mitzvah to the mitzvah to answer is if someone asks a question. I shouldn't say the mitzvah. Someone asks a question, you should answer. If they didn't ask a question, they have an agenda. That's a different thing. Again, the example was, I think the Torah discriminates against women. Did that person ask a question? They didn't ask a question. They gave a statement. A statement I don't have to answer. Now, someone asks, it's a different question. Somebody asks, if they ask you an evil question. Yeah? They ask you an evil question. So I would tell you it depends on the way they ask the question. If they're asking the question because they want an answer, then give an answer. If you have an answer. If you don't have an answer, ask somebody. Yeah. Or find an answer or find someone who can give the answer. Even if it's an evil question. Yeah. Even if it's an evil question. Some people will come out, let's say, very strongly against the Orthodox community for any number of things. I'm not saying they're justifiable, but let's say someone comes out against the Orthodox community. Yeah. And they make like a very derogatory statement. Now, I remember many years ago, this instead of question and answers, basically, it's basically snappy questions and snappy answers. Right? Sorry, snappy answers, snappy questions. That are backwards. Snappy answers, snappy questions. Right? In other words, somebody asks a question like this. Someone says, I think, or let's say better, they ask the question, isn't circumcision mutilation of the body? Or isn't, I love this question, but I'll never be able to give the answer. Isn't circumcision barbaric? And you say, no, barbarians don't do it. Next. That shuts the person up. That will shut them up. Or somebody once said to me, if I breathe on your food, this is a question. Yeah, sarcastic question, obviously. If I breathe on your kosher food, doesn't mean it's not kosher. Now, would you want to take a sledgehammer and slam that person? Maybe. Right? But, you want to see your cool, calm, and collected. My answer was, I said, no, it's kosher. Just has bad breath on it. Yeah. We don't always get the, sometimes my greatest answers came after the fact. Right? When I didn't have an answer. Yeah. But, sometimes I actually was able to answer on the spot. Yeah. That was a good answer. I think that was a good answer. That was it. Shut the person up. Totally shut the person up. Yeah. And that's what you got to do sometimes. That's exactly what you got to do. Because who says you have to take that? When it's being among, oh, they're making fun. Oh, just kidding, this and that. That's somebody many, many years ago make a really below the belt comment in front of me and my wife. Thank God I don't think I had kids at that point. Yeah, but made a whatever, very below the belt comment, let's say. Very obnoxious comment. Yeah. So my wife and I bam, answer this person straight away. Straight away. After that, person backed off and that was it. Barely opened his mouth after that. Right? Throughout the year. I won't say anything. Or barely will say, I don't think the person will remember what happened, but it doesn't matter. Put the person in their place. Period. Some things just better not to answer. Totally better not to answer. Yeah, you gotta pick your wars over here. Right? I've learned this the easy way and the hard way. Mostly the hard way. Meaning, there are times you just keep your mouth shut. There's just no point to answer. Yeah. Yeah, but when someone says, well, it's permissible to kill someone because it's not quality of life, okay, then I open my mouth. Then whether I should have or not, I don't know. But I open my mouth. I'm like, who gives you the right? I said, who in the world gives you the right and gives doctors the right to play God? That's my answer. Person's not a vegetable. Person's still alive. They might be paralyzed. Okay, that's not called quality of life. Right? I spoke about this. Right? I'm going to speak about more in my Q&A. I think that's an obnoxious thing to say. More than obnoxious. As if to say, I know what quality of life is. Well, guess what? You don't know a clue about nothing, right? And someone can't play Sudoku. I was going to say that, but I didn't. You know, if someone can't play Sudoku, it's game over. Their mind's been affected. Okay. So how do you define quality of life? We're not talking someone's on a respirator, or someone's on a ventilator, or someone's brain dead. Totally different question. You're talking about someone who's alive. Okay. They can smile. They can't really speak because they have a trach. Okay. Yeah. That's not called quality of life. According to who? They're alive. They can still think, they can still think, the way God wants them to think. They can't do anything right now. Okay, because they're paralyzed. Maybe that'll never change. I mean, they're much older. Okay, so maybe that'll never change. But it's a horrific way to live. And whatever other statements about people living horrific ways. Okay. So what do you do? Talk about someone who's like is just dying as a vegetable. Not literally. Doesn't really get out, more like a recluse, whatever's in a home, whatever it is. He's blind, can't really see. So like, what's the person do all day? No stimulation. No brain stimulation. Like someone said, get an audiobook, something. Stimulate yourself. Otherwise, the person's gonna die as a vegetable. Not literally. So what do? You kill him? That's not life. Okay, so what do? Give him a pill to take? Throw him over a cliff? I mean, I'm not saying they're saying that exactly. A little bit, that's me reading into it, but they're claiming quality of life. That's not quality of life. And what is quality of life? Playing bridge? Playing cards? What is quality of life? You know what quality of life is? It's doing what God wants you to do. That's quality of life to the best of your ability. That's our obligation. Yeah, even a person's last breath, if they can still do a mitzvah while they're dying. Yeah, that's quality of life. People suffer. Everybody suffers. Some more, some less. Yeah. Someone has the audacity. Okay, the person doesn't know nothing for nothing. Okay, someone has the audacity to say something like that. And that's what quality of life is, seriously. Yeah. Kind of irked me. It's obnoxious. As if to say, I know what quality of life is. I know better than God what life is. Again, you're going to say, come on, you're reading into it. That's not what they really meant. I know what they meant. I know exactly what they meant. But the insinuation is obnoxious. I wouldn't want that for myself. Good, nobody wants that. But that doesn't give you a right to kill them. Doesn't give you a right not to feed them. Right? That's doing something active. That's murder. That essentially is murder. Right? Now, the person didn't have the trach in. That's a whole other question. Did you have to do it? In some cases, absolutely you have to do it. But to pull it out, they're going to die. Yeah, but they're alive. They're not on oxygen. Right? They're not on a respirator. They're alive. Their brain still works. Okay, they can't do much. Because that's not quality of life. So what do? Well, I don't know. Kill them? I mean, I got to the point. Kill them? You take out that trick, that's murder. Well, according to secular law, so I don't care about secular law. Secular law doesn't matter. Right? The Torah is all-encompassing. What's my obligation? Am I allowed to pull it out and kill them? No. You're not allowed to hasten a person's death. That's hastening their death. Whether they should go on the trach or not, or go on a ventilator or not, that's another issue. That's a different issue. But you pull that out, they are 100% going to die. You know why they're going to die? They're going to suffocate, right? Biology 101. They will 100% suffocate and they will die because they can't breathe. Is there any difference between doing that and pulling the plug? No difference. Is there any difference between that and shooting them in the head? No difference. Is there any difference between that and throwing them over a cliff? I can think of a lot of different ways to kill someone. I'm in that type of mood, yeah? Throw them over a cliff. Is that any different? Murder. We look at it as murder. I don't care what secular courts say. I don't care what secular doctors have to say. Give the rats tail what they have to say. They'll kill people left and right. They don't care. They just get, they got someone's taking up a bed where someone else has got a better chance to live. There's a line over here. Okay, so put them out of their misery. They don't have a conscience. They call it the way they see it. Who cares the way they see it? Right? What does the Gemara in Kedushin say? Tov shebarofim legehenim. The best of doctors go down. The best of doctors. Why the best of doctors? See miracles on a regular basis and think they're still in charge. There are many, many cases with end of life things where, basically try and convince people to die when, they could live a number of years potentially. You do what you can to extend life to a point. But someone say it's not quality of life. Who cares? According to who? According to you, they can't play bridge. So what? They can't play Sudoku. So what? That's quality of life? That's what we're living for? We're living to serve God the best of our ability. That's the point. Eat a part of the vegetable, can't do anything. Okay, that's what God wants from you now. Why? Can't answer. But that's what he wants. Right? This person's probably going to die that way. They're in their 90s. Yeah, I'll probably never walk again, never get out of bed. Okay, that's what God wants. For whatever reason, you can't kill him or her. You don't have a right to kill him. It's murder. Where do you get off? That's what this world is. That's exactly what this world is. Throw out the old, just get rid of it. Well, he can't do anything anyway. Well, what if he can't do anything? So then what should we do? Put him in hospice? Rip out his trach. Guess what? Gonzo. 2 days left. Probably a couple hours. Finished. We'll kill him. It's a sad reality. Right? Like I said, what is quality of life? Right, yeah, I said better than that. I said, who gives you the right to say what quality of life is? To kill somebody. Killing someone is pretty severe. It's very severe. That was my statement. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Maybe. I said, who gives you the right to say that you killed someone? Who gives you the right to play God and say I can do what I want? Well, that's not quality of life. Give the right still is quality of life. According to who? Yeah, doctors have the right to say what quality of life is. You kill people. There's not even a question. Not even a question. You pull that trait, that's murder. 100%. 100%. Now I would say, okay. Someone makes a statement like that. Shouldn't say anything? Maybe. Maybe. That's irritating. More than irritating. Yeah. Doesn't matter who said it. The person has the right to say that. You can say they have different values. Okay. So what? Live and let live. Right? In this case, they'll murder people. They'll absolutely murder people. And they won't even think twice about it. The Greeks, as civilized as they were. Yeah, back in the day. You know what they did to their parents? When they got old, they don't want to take care of them. They took them up to a mountain, the side of a mountain, said, Mom, Dad's been real. See ya. That's civilization. That's like the greatest thinkers of our time. Put family members out to pasture. Out to pasture. Why are they going to put them out to pasture? They can't do anything. They don't need purpose now. I'm not saying they're sick and and ill and whatever. They haven't got to that point yet, but you know what? I don't want to deal with you. There's no purpose in this world. You're not going to have real quality of life, so we'll leave you in the lurch. The Greeks, the mighty Greeks, we live in a Greek culture today. The mighty Greeks, the great philosophers, animals. For the parents to die. They raised you, brought you up, they bathed you, they fed you, took care of your needs, for better, for worse. You're going to say, well, sorry. Yeah. Listen, a person can avoid, let's say, putting a parent in a nursing home, better. Nursing homes kill people also. Yeah, not directly, but whatever. It's a horrible thing, but a person can't take care of them. Yeah, so, you don't have money, to hire people, this and that. Okay. Yeah. Another issue. But Who gives the person the right to say, well, that's not quality of life? So you're saying kill them. That's what you're saying. I mean, I'm not reading into this. I'm not trying to find a problem. This is what they're saying. That's not quality of life. So I call them on it. So what's quality of life? What do you do with them? We can't leave them like that. Great. So what do you do? So what do you do? Get rid of them. Not any purpose anymore. Throw them out like yesterday's garment. But it's a loved one. How can you do that? The crazy world. The crazy world. And this is the norm. This is what a lot of people think. Unless you're thinking in God's will. In the way God runs them. And what he wants from them. Yeah, let me see. There are other questions here. What happens when you remarry if you are a widower? Who are you married to in the afterlife? Oh, good question. Good question. I would say that if a person, even if a person married the right person, right? Let's say you married your Bashir. You married the right person who you're supposed to marry, right? You're half a soul, the other person's half a soul. Very good. The other person dies. Yeah, the other person. I'm not saying we got divorced. Let's say the other person dies. Very good. The other person dies. Now, if the other person dies, and you remarry. Now, it's what we call a zivug sheni, a second. Well, it's like a second marriage, yeah. So now you have two souls again reunited. You can have more than one zivug, more than one marriage partner potentially. So the question is, in the next world, who are you hanging out with? The first one or the second one? Yeah, that's a good question. It's a good question. And what's the answer? I don't know. That's the answer. I'm not sure. We'll just check something here. Yeah, I'm not sure. I would want to say the first person you marry. That's what I want to say. But that I'm not sure. That I'm not sure. I've heard this question before. I don't remember the answer. Like I said, I do want to say the first person, but I'm not. I don't want to put any money on it. So I'll have to look into that more. Yeah, it's a good question though. Questions come up. Question that has come up. Over the years, and what's going to be. A person got divorced, I can understand. Make it easier. A person remarried, right? Let's say they remarried, so they'll be with that person next month. That would make more sense. That makes sense, right? That makes sense. But anyone who's got divorced, yeah, that you don't have to worry. That you don't have to worry about the next one, right? Someone who person, let's say remarries, right? So if a person got divorced, which is a much easier question, if they got divorced, very good. If they got divorced, then the person they marry, probably be with them. Yeah, the question is going to be by, a person was happy with their first spouse. Let's say the first spouse died. Yeah, it could be, right? There's another question. It's not really so similar, but I'll mention it anyway. And that is that most people are reincarnated souls. So most people are reincarnated souls. We understand by resurrection of the dead, we're going to be in a different type of body. What type of body? Nobody knows. Right? Like I asked my this question once, and he's like, it's a different body. Different body, we don't understand what it is. So I asked him a second time, I asked him a third time. I was like, listen, I've never been in that world, met anyone been in that world and come back, so I can't answer. But it's a different type of body. Okay. Now, we've been in different bodies, right? Our soul is not the first time it's come in the world. That's probably, at least third time probably, or maybe fourth time maximum. Probably the last time we're going to be here. Our soul's going to be here. So which body, if we would get up at resurrection of the dead, even if it's going to be a different type of body, so to speak, which body gets up at resurrection of the dead? Yeah, so that I've heard people say it's going to be the body that helped it the most reach its potential. Whatever body the soul was in that helped it reach its, it helped get closer to reaching its true potential, then that body will get up at resurrection. Again, it's going to act differently than it does now. According to some, according to the Rambam, won't be that much different, right? It doesn't really matter. But that I've heard, right? In other words, the body itself that helped reach its potential. Now, do we say the same thing about the spouse? Let's say a person remarries, but first spouse helped them much more in reaching them potential. Does it work that way? I'm not sure. That I'm not sure. But by resurrection of the dead, that I've heard. Right? That I've heard. Someone says I read it the first unless God in his mystery decides differently. I don't know. I again, if you were to ask me off the cuff, I would say it's probably the first. Right? It's probably the first one a person was married to. But I'm not saying that definitively. That's what I would say off the cuff. But again, I'm not sure. Somebody asks, are Orthodox Jews allowed to have photos of family or children on the walls? No reason not to. Right? No, plenty of people that do. They have pictures of, let's say, pictures from weddings. The married kids. And they have like whole family pictures there. Yeah, it's not a problem. Definitely not a problem. Put on the wall. A person wants to put, great rabbis of generation, previous generations on the wall. You can do that, right? Family pictures is not bad. I would say though, if you're gonna put up pictures, they should be modest, right? If people are dressed modestly, I wouldn't put them up. If people, are dressed relatively modestly, then yeah, that wouldn't be a problem. But if you're gonna have pictures up and there are women that, let's say, short skirts and sleeveless and all the cleavage hanging out, no pun intended, or keep this clean. Yeah, so that would be a problem, right? But again, if there weren't any modesty issues, then then it shouldn't be a problem, right? Then for sure, it shouldn't be a problem. I've seen people put like let's say wedding pictures in the break front or put them on the wall or yeah, so it's not a it's definitely not a problem. Right. Again, if there are modesty issues, that would be a problem. That would be a bigger problem. But if everyone seemingly is dressed okay, I don't see why I don't see why it should be an issue. People put all kinds of pictures up. Say pictures of Jerusalem, pictures of you want positive things. Definitely, a person can put up all kinds of artwork. I mean, artwork doesn't mean it's forbidden, right? If it's, nice artwork, person can put up there. Let's say a person, needle points exquisitely. So person puts it in a frame, puts it up. Not a problem, right? It's definitely not a problem. Again, as long as it's not, idolatrous or anything like that. If it's Jewish symbolism, again, not a problem. Person wants to put up, as I said before, let's say, pictures of great rabbis, previous generation. It's not a problem. People aren't worshiping them, right? That's not idol worship. People may look at it as idol worship, but it's not. You're not worshiping them. You might worship the Torah that they know, but you're certainly not worshiping them. I just saw, a picture earlier. It was by my Rebbe's house on the last day of Sukkot on Hoshana Rabbah. And anyway, he was supposed to be seeing people and he didn't, but whatever, sort of like, snuck in the door. And he had these Hoshanas. He's like these myrtle leaves. Some people on the last day, I mentioned this before in my class on Sukkot, that some people like on the last day of Hoshana Rabbah, they have these like huge Hoshanas, like these huge willows, like branches, like really, really big ones. And obviously, at a certain point in the service, you take them and you you bang them on the ground, for different reasons. A lot of them, Kabbalistic reasons. Anyway, when I got to my Rebbe's house, I was with whatever, I was with my youngest son, and someone had brought in one of his grandkids had brought in like a whole bunch of these, myrtle leaves, probably not just for him, but for other people in the family, whatever. And so I happened to be there, and on his table was a huge. I mean, it was like the size of the table. I mean, it's huge. He had these big Hoshanas, these big branches of Hoshana. So I'm thinking like he's 100 years old, almost 100 years old. Like how in the world's going to lift it? But I said, not only is he going to lift it, if he could lift it, how in the world is he going to, how in the world is going to bang it on the ground? I mean, it's not something light, by any stretch. Anyway, right before Shabbos, got this email, kind of late, but whatever. Got this email with all these different pictures from him on Sukkot, and his pictures of shaking the lulav and other things. And one of the pictures they had, someone took is him with these big hoshanas. I mean, like, he was sitting there, wasn't standing, but he had these hoshanas in his hand. I'm like, that's a great shot. I mean, it was a great picture, right? So, yeah, might be something I might get blown up one day. But it was, yeah. Not only that, but I forgot to mention one thing. It was also, Hoshana Rabbah's considered like the last kvittel, it's called, like the last time if there's a bad decree override it, to override this bad decree. So there are people that dress up in a kittel, in a white, in a white coat or whatever. I mean, so anyway, we were there. I couldn't really speak to him. He was saying over. There's a custom to read the entire book of Deuteronomy on Hoshana Rabbah, different customs on Hoshana Rabbah. Anyway, so one of his grandkids said, "Listen, you're not gonna be able to say anything. He's not gonna acknowledge you, whatever. But listen, if you want to stand and watch him. He's reading Mishnah Torah. He's reading the entire book of Deuteronomy. He wasn't reading out loud, right? Whatever. He's reading to himself, but his grandkids are reading also. So if you want to watch, you can watch. So whatever. He's there for like, I don't know, 5, 10 minutes. But it's like seeing an angel in front of you. Just like, his intention, his concentration, other things, whatever. So like seeing that picture, seeing that picture with the Hoshanas, it was like, whatever. It was whatever. It was pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing thing, to see. I wish I could have been, been there to see him actually, actually trying, like, put it on the ground. I can't imagine he did it, but just because of his age. But any case, it was something to see, like, kind of like this whole tree. It's like, it was a funny sight to see, see him holding, all dressed in white or whatever, like, with all this concentration, like holding these Hoshanas. It was whatever, a pretty amazing, pretty amazing picture. Somebody asked, let me see other questions. I'll take questions now. Somebody asks, what image of the glory of God assume? The cloud. Can't answer more than that. I mean, you talk about God's presence. No one can see, what does Moses say? No one can see God's presence. Sorry, God says no one can see my face and live, right? No one can see my face and live. So, so what did they see? What did they see? What was the glory of God? Could be the cloud, right? More than that, I can't answer. Don't know. So it's not an image, can't be an image, right? Can't be an image, even though, I've heard some, Christians say, the verse in Isaiah says, saw, God's presence on, God, footstool, whatever it's called. So they want to claim that's JC. Let's talk about an angel, right? In this vision, it was clearly, Isaiah is talking about an angel, right? But obviously, the Christians are going to say, well, it can't be God himself because the Torah says no one can see my face and live. Very good, right? At least they got that right. Yeah, very good. Yeah, what's the problem though? So they're going to say, it's not God himself. So who is it? According to them, makes perfect sense, right? It's talking about JC. Very good, right? According to them. right? But what do the commentaries say? You're right, it wasn't God, because no one can see my face and live. That's the whole question. Very good. So even though it's not God, who is it? It's an angel. They're able to see an angel. Okay. Yeah, they have a good question. I'm not saying not. It's a valid question, right? It can't be God himself. No one can see God's face and live, right? That's clear according to Torah. Nobody. God says you can't see my face and live. So what do they see, right? So in the vision of Isaiah, what did he see? Can't be God, right? That everybody agrees, and the Christians will agree. So who was it? So according to the Christians, JC. According to us, it was an angel. Is it problematic for an Orthodox Jewish woman sing as a career? Like, for example, opera. Is it an opera modesty problem? Yes. Unless she's singing for women. If she's singing exclusively for women, she could do it. She could teach singing. She could, there are women who do that. They have their own albums. They sing for women. The problem is, if they put anything on YouTube or anything else, and guys listen to it, Jewish men listen to it, it's a problem, right? That would be a problem, right? So if, I see, sometimes there are things up there and there's a disclaimer. This is only for women to watch. But that's putting in a stumbling block, essentially. You can say, why can't we put it up? It's good advertising, this and that. But again, it's putting a stumbling block if a Jewish man watches it, right? Or listens to it. Even if he doesn't, look at the images, but he hears the music. That's also a problem, right? It's for sure a problem. Now on, let's say, music discs. Yeah, let's say on music discs or tapes back in the day, right? On it says only for women to listen to. Okay. Yeah, does that help 100%? In some ways it does. It'll exonerate them. What if, are they not allowed to use it to make music and try and make money from it if it's going to cause a stumbling block for others? So the answer is that shouldn't be an issue. Shouldn't be an issue. But on YouTube would be a bigger issue, right? But selling them on this shouldn't be a problem. The issue is going to be in a mixed crowd. That's a problem. Even for a guy, even, you got male singers, Jewish singers, and there are some that will only perform in front of a mixed crowd if there's a mechitza, if there's a separation. There are people that will not sing in front of a mixed crowd if they're mixed. Yeah, men and women together. Others, will. So that's a different issue. That's a different issue. But for a woman to sing in front of men, that's a problem. That for sure is a problem. So if she's going to sing, she's going to have her own concert in front of women, sells out a whole arena or whatever, not a problem. Certainly not a problem. Yeah. Any of those venues wouldn't be a problem. Or to make her own music and this and whatever, also not a problem. But if she's going to sing in front of men, that's a problem. Especially Jewish men, that would be a problem. Right? And whatever. And non-Jews also be a problem. Be a modesty. For sure be a modesty issue. Yeah. And again, men singing in front of women, even if it, if they're separate seating, very good. But you can see them. Yeah. But, that's less of a problem. Less of a problem. There was an issue a number of years ago that someone was going to sing. Well, it's a secular place, but only Orthodox Jews were going to be there. They're going to sing men and women separate. Who canceled it? Municipality canceled the discrimination against women. Only in Israel. Discrimination against women. But who were the people that were going to go to this concert? Secular Jews were not going to this concert. It was religious Jews going to this concert. So what's the problem? Municipality made a whole stink, a humongous stink against it. And they canceled it. But it's discriminatory against women because they're going to be separated by a mechitza. But they choose that. They're choosing to go to a concert under those circumstances. No one's forcing them. But that's discriminatory against women. Right? Similar thing would happen in Tel Aviv a couple years ago on Yom Kippur. made services outside, separate seating. People trashed the place, trashed it. Goes against our values, goes against. So don't come. No one says you have to come, you have to participate, so don't come. It's your choice. But these people are coming and making a conscious choice. You want to say it's illegal? It's illegal to discriminate against women. They're doing it themselves. Oh, it's a cult. They're being brainwashed. It's their choice. You want to cancel an event on Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur prayers that are separate because they're supposed to be separate religiously, and you want to say it's discriminatory against women. So don't come. But it goes against everything we stand for. You don't have to come. You don't have to be a part of it. Could that be a reason? A potential reason? You know, in the land of Israel, Tel Aviv definitely holier than New York. Nothing to talk about. Even in Tel Aviv. And God looks down and say, "Look what my people are doing there." They're going against the right thing to do on the holiest day of the year. In my back town, in my home. In my home, that's what they're doing. Again, is that why October 7th happened? I'm not saying that's the reason. But if I were God, put on my funny George Burns glasses and my funny mustache, I look down and I say, the holiest day of the year, you're fighting? Because it goes against your beliefs? So don't come! But you make a whole thing about it, you want to shut it down and other things? You're going to say, well, these people don't know anything, they never learned anything, this and that. Okay, that's bad. That easily can bring about God's anger. Even if it wasn't on Yom Kippur. The fact it was on Yom Kippur, I mean, the whole year before October 7th, infighting left and right. And the right and the left, no pun intended, and trying to bring down the government and other things. Tremendous infighting, tremendous Lashon Hara, horrific things. Protests all over the place. Being sponsored by the left in America and in Europe. Go figure. Trying to bring down Netanyahu. Okay, without getting into politics. All this infighting didn't help. Totally didn't help. And like someone had said, after they get all the hostages back, they're going to be back to protest. Right? He said not even 1 hour afterward. They'll be back to what they were doing before. That's horrific. So much unity right now and gets destroyed. Go back to what it was. But that's potentially why this whole thing happened in the first place. Not saying the only reason. Could be plenty of reasons. That might be one of them. Yeah, so you got to do something like that in God's backyard. That's bad. 100% that's bad. God looks down on Yom Kippur? Like, really? On Yom Kippur itself? The holiest day in the year? God's like, no, I'm not going to tolerate that. That's too much. That's already too far. Yeah? The payback. Right? That's what my Rebbe says. I'm not worried about Iran or any of these other places. I'm worried about Jews' sin in Israel. That's a pretty big sin. Pretty big sin right there. Doesn't matter what they know, what they don't know. Fighting, rebelling against God. That's pretty bad. Fighting and not allowing Jews to pray on the holiest day of the year in your own country, in the holiest place in the world. Yeah. I mean, not the holiest city, but the holiest place, i.e. the land of Israel. Any place in Israel is holier than New York. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Yeah. No matter what's going on there, it's still holy. So even in Tel Aviv, coming out, against Yom Kippur, that's bad. Again, it doesn't matter what they know, what they don't know. And the whole thing was bad. Yeah. Let me see. One thing that, comes out, in a lot of these things, is the fact that people don't have the right anymore to express opinion. They don't like your opinion, kill them. Too right wing. What do we need them for? Somebody dies trying to get over good values. Good thing he died. We don't need him. We don't want those values. Okay, so you don't want the values. You disagree with the values. Okay. I can understand that. Very good. Kill somebody? And to say it's good the person's dead, so we don't, the person can't say what he's saying anymore. That means there's no value anymore. Right? This is what Berkowitz was saying. There's no values anymore. You can disagree, that's fine. You can have different in opinion. But to say that you disagree with someone and you're happy that they're dead and that their values are dead or whatever they were saying, that's a good thing. That's horrific. That means there are no values anymore. Even on the left, right? That shows the left has no values. Zero values. They may say, we got these values, that value, whatever. But they don't want, they don't want people who don't have their values. They don't have the values, get rid of them. It's not no, we'll debate, we'll have a discussion, we'll have this. We can agree to disagree. No. We'll call for violence, kill the person. Take them out. Right? Isn't that what happened? Say me what happened. Say whatever you want about Charlie Kirk, but yeah. The values weren't bad. Okay, he's idolater, other things. And he's liable for death penalty. I guess could be that's why he got it. Evangelical Christian, nothing to talk about. Yeah. But he's not bad values, per se. Yeah. But to say it's a good thing he's dead. We don't need his values, so kill him. Deserves to die. That's pretty radical. Yeah. So what happened to live and let live? Out the window. So that shows secular left has no value. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have heard that. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have heard that. Maybe by somewhere, whatever, but you get a lot of people saying the same thing. Yeah. We're not going to tolerate these values. Okay, you can disagree. So you disagree. I can tell you I disagree with so many things on the left and all that. Okay, so we can disagree. Yeah, well, they have religious repercussions, fine, but it doesn't matter. That mean everyone on the left should die? You should go out and kill them, let's say. God will take care of them, don't worry. Right? Harbe shluchim lamakom. God got a lot of ways to do things. Doesn't give us the right to be vigilantes. Can't just go out and kill them. Right? You won't be able to do it anyway, even if they deserve death penalty. Right? Because we got law of the land. You have the law of the land. You can't go out and do whatever you want. Even if they are liable for death penalty. Yeah, so what? Well, that doesn't give us the right to go out and do it. And to go and advocate, it's even worse. Right? What do you think is going to happen? Enough people advocate this stuff. Someone's got to go out and do something. Power suggestion. There was a story many, many years ago. Some kids were watching the movie 1,000 Faces of Death, right? All these different ways, kill people and whatever. They wanted to feel like what death was. They took classmates they didn't like, whatever, and they killed them. All kinds of flack, back in the day about it, and the power of TV and movies and this and that. But that's a direct result. You can say, these kids, they never had any they weren't in jail, they weren't troubled kids, came from good families, this and that. They wanted to feel because they got influenced by this movie. That's what happened. It was a sick thing. They want to feel death, so they kill a classmate. So you could say, wow, these kids aren't normal, came from a broken family. They get, no. And people coming out left and right, violence on, TV, violence on cable, violence on, it's other type of movies, whatever. Power suggestion. Right? You get enough, people out there that hate the other side. Either way, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Left is, left is against the right is whatever. And they'll say, okay, we're not, we agree to disagree. That'd be good if they would leave it there. What about incitement? What about other things? Because without getting political, people can say, whatever they want about Trump, for him, against him, whatever. He's flawed, right? Everyone agrees he's flawed. I don't think there's any question. That means he deserves to die. And people try to kill him twice. Twice. You know about impeachment and incitement and all these other things against him. Yeah, which they, which many things they didn't find anything, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. But does he have the right to die? Now, some people would 100% on the left would say yes. Yeah, and if he dies, if God forbid, if somebody killed him, half the country would be like, yes, that's exactly what this guy deserves. That's what he deserves. Imagine if someone on the left, imagine if someone tried to kill Biden twice. What America would look like. Any leftists that try to kill? Justified. The other way, justified. Of course he deserves to die. Oh, everybody condemned it. People condemned it. No, that's not the way to do it. We have to have dialogue. Okay, that's true. But who's inciting over here? Were there Democrats that said he absolutely deserves to die? I think it's pretty clear. And there'll be people that'll say yes. Undeniably. What he's doing to the country, look at it. Deserves to die? Yeah, okay. Try and get him out of office, do other things. Kill him? Literally? Do something so he should die? And what would happen? There'd be a huge segment of people that would not even blink an eye and say, he got what he deserved. What they said about Charlie Kirk, he got what he deserved. Because they disagreed with it. So as Berkowitz said, that means they have no values. They have zero values. Again, we can disagree with people. That's what dialogue's all about. You may convince, they may not convince, and they may convince you or not, or whatever. Okay. So you can say, I agree to disagree. But does that mean, if your person's all cooked up, then that means you're not only you don't have a right to what to say, that's a whole nother issue. You don't have a right to say anything, but you don't also deserve to be in this world. That is pretty severe. That is pretty darn severe. And that's what the world's come to. It's not about disagreeing and saying we can agree to disagree. That's not where it ends. If that's where it ends, okay. But he did this, and he said that, and he's a menace, and he deserves to be put out of our misery. Didn't some people in the government actually say such a thing? Yes. People said it. You get thrown in jail. Crazy. Absolutely insane. And guaranteed, God forbid anything happened to him. If he would be, nothing died on his own. Has massive heart attack, stroke, I don't know, got cancer, who knows what. Fell and bumped his head and that was it. Whatever it may be, that's one thing. That's one thing. Yeah, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. Yeah, if he got assassinated, there'd be a lot of people saying he deserved what he got. If he died other ways, okay. But they also say the same thing. I'm not saying you have to love what he says. I'm not saying you have to love what he stands for. Yeah. But what does that incitement do? Gets people all cooked up. It's not like, oh, I don't like this person. I despise this person. No, maybe he deserves it. Tell me he's pompous and other things. It's dictatorial, it is, that, whatever it is. People think he's ruining the country, whatever. Deserves to die. Yeah, that's a bit much. But how many people, if God forbid, let's say he got assassinated. God forbid, let's say he got assassinated. There'd be people dancing in the streets. Some. Say the same thing about Netanyahu. Plenty of people hate him also here. Yeah. And people say, yeah. They wouldn't have any remorse. They wouldn't have any regret. When Rabin was killed, someone on the right wing, and he incited the right wing a lot. Now, this person who killed him obviously didn't have a right to kill him and whatever, without getting into conspiracy theories and other things. He killed him. Okay. Yeah, but there's so much incitement from the left. I'm not saying it's justified. Murdering someone's never justified. Could I understand? Could I understand that it could cause someone to like go off the rails? Could, because of what you're doing to the other side. In other words, you're bringing up this frenzied hatred. What does frenzied hatred do? Cause people to act in ways maybe they wouldn't normally do. But now they're all cooked up. They're all cooked up. They think someone like Trump, people have hated him for years. For years. And many would say deservedly so. Okay. But this is a pretty severe thing. You know, and if God forbid anything to happen, what would people say? And many would say he got what he deserved. Nothing to talk about. Nothing to talk about. So, you know, so as Berkowitz said, I think it's very true. That means there's no dialogue. That means society's gone off the rails. Again, I don't think you have to like this guy. You know, and you can say he's this, he's that, he's the other thing. Okay. You know, Leib Malachim B'Yad Hashem. The heart of kings is in the hand of God, says King Solomon in Proverbs. He's obviously president for a reason. Why? Can't answer. God wanted him in there, wanted him to lose, and then wanted him back. Okay, for whatever reason. But nobody, I think, almost in history has been vilified as much as he's been. Even if he deserves it. But how far does that go? It says with Berkowitz, when you don't have that dialogue, it's all about, you know, I don't like what you say, so I'm going to kill you. And I don't, you know, or if the person dies, they had it coming. There's something seriously wrong. Yeah. So it's also power of the inclination. Tremendous power. Because then you're swept up by it. But what does it do, though? What it does, it puts poison in the person's heart. That's what it does. And it stops them from doing what they need to do because they have this hatred. Right? Because essentially they have this hatred. So what goes on, right? So what goes on out there, yeah, in general, what's going to happen? It's going to drive people to do things maybe they wouldn't normally do. They'll say, oh, it's his fault. He drove the masses to do this, do that. I mean, there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes. A lot of things going on behind the scenes. Yeah, regardless of what a person says or not. But the point is, there's no dialogue. And because there's no dialogue, what happens? What essentially happens? It's chaos. It means there are no values. When you have no values, that's destruction of society. On the other hand, one only good thing it comes out of it is getting close to coming to the Messiah. Because this is exactly what's supposed to happen, deterioration of values. You know, we see that clear as, you know, I brought down from my Rebbe. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop there. Any questions? Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Saturday, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Mar Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, Ethics for Fathers, Book of Leviticus, which we're going to hit tomorrow, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Israel Time. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com. You want to contact me, RBBICHIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com, which having a good beginning of the day, middle of the day, and